Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if it's your very first time here, welcome on in. I cannot believe it is time for another yearly bullet journal setup. This is one of my favorite videos to film, also my, the video that takes the longest to do so. But I am very excited to spend yet another year within the pages of this Starry Night journal from Scribbles That Matter. I had such an amazing time using this journal for 2024, and I feel like I've just barely scratched the surface of the creativity that I can get myself into within these pages. So I hope you're ready to join me on yet another cozy journey within this journal. When it comes to setting up my bullet journal for the year, I really love when all of my yearly setup pages kind of have the same running theme going on throughout them. Last year, I did a very gothic heavy kind of architecture theme. The year before that was a little bit more on the cottagecore side. This year, I really wanted to, again, lean into one of my favorite things on this planet, and that's coffee. I had this idea in mind that I wanted essentially the first spread within this journal to essentially look like the outside of a coffee shop. The outside of my coffee shop. I kind of have this dream, I don't know, this aspiration to maybe one day own my own coffee shop and stationery shop hybrid. Whether this is kind of playing a part in manifesting that, I don't really know. That dream is kind of far off from where I am right now, but I just think it'd be so cool to blend two of my favorite passions together into one little cozy shop. So that is the inspiration for these yearly setup pages. Something that I ended up doing a lot of throughout this yearly setup was actually covering up the black pages that I was just recently praising. With the usual vintage looking book pages, and that's mainly because I wanted to do something different than 2024's yearly setup. Last year, the gothic theme really kind of went hand in hand with the black pages being the main focal point of each of the spreads. Plus, because I am doing a coffee theme, I think that just looks a little bit better with just an added bit of contrast. Before kind of editing this down to a little bit under 40 minutes, I had about 6 hours of footage that I had to go through. I filmed this video over the course of a few days, so if you see changes in lighting and changes in coffee and sweater, that's why. This is the video that takes me the longest amount of time to do, but it's also the most rewarding and the most fun, just setting up the year ahead. So like I mentioned earlier, I wanted the first spread when you open this journal to look like the outside of a coffee shop. So to help illustrate that, I cut out some pieces of craft and black paper to create that scalloped awning look at the top of the page. And then, of course, our little coffee shop needs a sign, so I thought this would be the perfect way to write 2025, and then name our little cafe the Scribbles Cafe. This is also the name of my Patreon. It just kind of works out. I think if I actually were to have my own cafe, I would name it the Scribbles Cafe because, again, it's like that hybrid between selling coffee and selling stationery. Something that I really want to do more of in 2025 is have more like interactive and moving elements within my journals. I started doing that a little bit in 2024, especially with some of my mood trackers, but starting off the year right for 2025, I decided to loop some twine through the little faux sign that I made just to mimic the look of, one of those signs swinging back and forth outside of a little shop. On the adjacent page, I wanted to make essentially a faux window looking into, I guess, what would be my cafe. I don't know if this is what it would look like, but this was probably my favorite photo of the inside of a cafe that I found on Pinterest. So then I used my X-Acto knife to cut out a little window frame for the image. Now I'm just adding a little bit of extra detail to the awning because I felt like it was looking a little bit plain. Honestly though, compared to my first spread from last year's bullet journal, this one is relatively plain. I felt like last year I really went heavy on the gothic ephemera and doodles, but I almost wanted this first spread to of course be the outside of a cafe, but almost like once you flip the page, you've walked into the cafe and there's all this coffee, ephemera, and stationery, and that's kind of what I was envisioning. And I feel like usually the outside of a cafe doesn't really have too much going on anyways, but this is exactly what I was hoping this first spread would look like, and I'm just finalizing it by, of course, adding the usual coffee staining. That is something that I use literally throughout this entire setup. Speaking of, I will also try to make sure to link as much as I can in the description of any of the supplies that I use a majority of the time throughout this video. As always though, if you have a specific question on anything that I used and I didn't mention it, feel free to ask in the comments. I use a lot of stationery, of course, when I'm creating my setups, so I realistically can't mention anything, but that is going to complete the first page of this setup. So now we are going to move on to the next spread, which is going to be my 2025 goals. I knew that for this page, I wanted to write out my goals in almost like a menu style format. So I used a scrap piece of black and craft paper to essentially create a faux chalkboard sign, and then used my Sakura white Jelly Roll pen to write out all of my goals. One of the goals that I hope to work towards the most in 2025 is being more intentional about setting time aside to create art for myself. Even though the journal spreads I create are, of course, for myself, there is naturally that underlying pressure because I'm sharing all of them online. So next year, I really want to be more mindful of my journaling sessions by focusing on thoughtful and creative exercises. Luckily, with the help of Skillshare, which are kindly sponsoring today's video, I think I can do just that. In case this is your very first time hearing about them, Skillshare is an incredible online learning community designed by creatives for creatives. And it's filled with thousands of different classes across a variety of genres, from productivity to drawing to digital illustration and, of course, journaling. Now, I've been using Skillshare for years, and it has truly been one of my favorite ways to learn new video editing skills, improve my freelancing workflow, rediscover my love for traditional art, and get in touch with my creative identity. One of my favorite parts about Skillshare, besides their individual classes, are actually their curated learning paths. The one I'm currently taking is the Reconnect to Yourself with Guided Journaling path, which includes 4 classes aimed at exploring personal growth through self-reflective journaling exercises and prompts. As someone who loves to learn and discover more ways of expressing themselves through art, as well as being a very elaborate note-taker, Skillshare has been my favorite place to develop healthy creative habits as well as explore new skills at a pace that works best for me. So if you guys would like to give it a go and experience the wonders of Skillshare for yourself, the first 500 people to join using my link will get a 1-month free trial. A huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. After writing out all my goals, I decided to also add some pricing to each of them just to kind of reinforce the idea that this is a menu. The numbers really don't have any significance. I just chose random ones, and I just wanted to make it look like a menu at a coffee shop. When it comes to thinking about goals for me personally, I try not to constrict them to the year in which I'm dictating them, if that makes sense. They're more so just aspirations and things that I want to get better at, things I want to work towards in the coming year. And I also wanted to make a point to try to stay away from anything super statistical. So when I was originally drafting the list, I had like number of YouTube subscribers and Patreon members, but those are things that I can't control. So I wanted to make sure that whatever goals I was choosing are ones that I can actively control and actively work towards, which is why, like, even though it says read 20 books and that does have a number attached to it, it's still something that only I can work on. So that was pretty much my mindset when I was coming up with this list of goals. So I have visiting a new place, learning a new skill, relearning art history, learning more ways to make coffee, which is Obviously just kind of a fun one, but it is a nod to this setup, so I kind of felt like it was a necessary goal to include. Also, because I do have a business of my own, I wanted to make sure that the goals that I have for my personal growth and business goals stay entirely separate, because it shouldn't be dictated on each other. But of course, I do have my own separate set of goals for my shop and my career, and maybe one day my own little coffee shop. In typical Scribbles fashion, I of course needed to include essentially just a page of ephemera that matches the theme for the year. So this is just a whole cluster of a bunch of different coffee-based ephemera, stickers, literally anything that just gave off the vibes of a cozy coffee shop is on this spread. It isn't necessarily a mood board, it's just kind of a fun page that I love doing for some of my setups. Also, because I love coffee, I naturally have an overabundance of coffee-inspired stationery, so this is literally the perfect time just to use it all. One of the newer bits of stationery that I received recently is this little lattice window decor piece. I got these in a Grabby subscription box, and if you missed that unboxing, I will make sure to link the video above so you can check out all of the spooky stationery that I received. I am so looking forward to using it for next year, and one of my favorite items in that box were these little windows, and I end up using 2 of them in this setup. It just adds to the cafe vibes that I was hoping for. Finishing off the page by, of course, adding some cute little coffee-inspired quotes with my Sakura Jelly Roll pen. This pen is once again going to probably be my most used writing utensil for another year. This has been one of my favorite stationery items to use in this journal. As I mentioned before, I of course will be doing a dedicated favorite stationery video for 2024, but I was also thinking of doing another video where I solely just talk about both my experience using a black page bullet journal and also the stationery items that I tend to use the most, because since they are black pages, you can't just really use anything. That video probably will be coming out at some point next year, early next year, hopefully. I have a lot of videos on my to-do list, and I will try to get them out in a timely manner, which is just so funny because I remember kind of doing a post on my community tab asking you guys for questions because I wanted to do a Q&A, and I still have not done that video. So if you have any questions that you would like, me to answer, whether it's small business or journaling based or, whatever kind of questions you want to ask, feel free to go to that post in the community tab because I probably won't end up doing it until next year anyway. Speaking of videos, I actually recently just finished filming my 2024 bullet journal flip through. Hopefully, again, will be up sooner rather than later. But in that video, I was kind of going through some of my spreads and talking about the ones that I would do, the ones I wouldn't do, or maybe even the ones I would change. And as far as the yearly setups, I have decided to do away with the weather tracker. I've done it for the past 2 years, and it was fun to track, but the issue is that I live in California, in a place where the weather doesn't really change all that often, so it would pretty much just it would just be sunny. Like all of the days would have the same color, and it just was kind of boring. So kind of towards the last few months of the year, I really stopped using that page, except for the fact that it was essentially a calendar that I would constantly flip through whenever I needed it. So I basically just created the same thing. I have an entire calendar page, but there's no tracker associated with it. It is just for the purpose of being a calendar. To create it, I used my 2025 mini calendar sticker sheet that is currently available in my shop, and I have recently switched over to a different type of craft paper, and I think it just looks so good with this entire setup. It does kind of blend a little bit on camera, but in person it stands out a little bit more. In terms of calendar setups, this one has honestly worked the best for me. I've tried future logs in the past and they just didn't really serve any purpose for me. I never used it, so that's why I'm just sticking with the simple calendar layout. Moving on to the next page, this is also a new spread that I created for 2024, and that is my year in Scribbles. Unlike my goals page from earlier, this one is solely dedicated to anything that deals with my business and my content. So essentially I can look at where I ended up at the end of 2025. I will finish out 2024 and enter in all of those statistics. And hopefully there is somewhat of a difference between the end of this year and the end of 2025. As far as the specific stats I track, I do my YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Patreon, TikTok, and Etsy. Hopefully though, we'll see. I might end up adding another category because I do plan to open my own personal website for my shop that is separate from my Etsy. So we'll see. Hopefully I end up adding that at some point in 2025. After adding in a few extra ephemera pieces, this spread is all done. Now, when I was talking about my goals, I did mention that one of them was learning new ways to make coffee. Which is obviously more of a fun idea, but I kind of wanted to double down on that and create an entire spread just dedicated to coffee in 2025. So I'm calling this spread my year in coffee. This will essentially be home base for anything coffee related that happens during the next year, whether it's visiting a new coffee shop or trying out a new recipe, maybe a receipt or something like that. Literally just anything coffee related that I pick up throughout the year is going to go on this page. As you can see, I once again covered the entire spread with the same book paper that I used earlier. And because I ended up running out of my favorite letter washi tape, I had to alternate between using that and then using some stickers from the Archer and Olive Halloween collection, which has been one of my favorite additions to my stationery collection over the past few months. Speaking of, I had recently picked up a few things from Traveler's Company, including a journal that I want to use for next year and these little mini craft envelopes. My initial idea with these envelopes was to create a spread within the yearly setup that would essentially be little ephemera envelopes for each of the months of the year. I didn't measure, of course, and they ended up being way too big for the idea that I had. I was hoping to fit 4 on one page, but that's just, it wasn't, it didn't work out that way. So I will still use these for every single month, but they'll just be with their respective months instead of them all being together. But I had a few extra, so I decided to use one for this spread, and this is essentially where I'll keep any receipt, ephemera, just anything coffee based that I want to save from 2025. For the other side of the page, I actually decided to use a few of the book trackers. Well, they're meant to be for books specifically, but I had a few extras lying around. I do offer these in my shop, but I think I'm going to be discontinuing them for the moment. They're just a little bit too tedious to make right now, so I think I just need to come up with a better way to offer them to you all. But I decided to use a few of the extra ones I had, and I really want to take time to visit more coffee shops in 2025. So my hope for these little guys is to track the new ones I go to and then rate them. I just feel like that'd be kind of a fun addition to this spread. With this spread all done, we are now going to be moving on to one of my favorite spreads to do every single year, and that is my 2025 themes, my yearly themes. This has just been such a fun way as kind of like a time capsule of my year, a roundup. I don't know, it's just so much fun to quickly look and see what themes I decided to do for every single month all in one place. For the most part, this spread is pretty much the same as the previous year. I am using the same month stickers from Sierra Studio, as well as the same craft paper squares. I actually recently posted this spread all filled out for 2024 on my Instagram, so if you would like to see how this page ended up looking, feel free to check it out over there. When I did this spread for 2023, I made the mistake of filling this out as the months went by. But what ended up happening was that all of the photos that I choose were all different sizes, all different dimensions, and it just didn't look good. It was a mess, honestly. So even though this spread will end up being empty until the very last month of the year, it's worth it because all of the photos will be the exact same size. And I don't have to worry about printing one single square image every single month. Whether you're new to bullet journaling or if you're just looking to spice up your yearly setup by adding a different kind of spread, this is the one I always tend to recommend, especially if you end up doing very different style themes every single month, or even if your journals tend to be more on the minimalist side and you only find yourself using different colors every single month. That could be a really fun way to do this spread too. So instead of doing a yearly theme spread, you can do a yearly color palette spread, for instance. So yeah, this is honestly one of my favorite spreads to do every single year. Since I have yet to do any sort of doodles for this yearly setup thus far, I decided that this would be the perfect opportunity to do so because I still had quite a bit of empty space left over. So I used my Jelly Roll pen to doodle out a French press that has coffee dripping out of it. And then in the bottom left corner, I just drew some hot coffee with a fun little foam design. In my previous monthly setup, I ended up running out of the size 10 of the Jelly Rolls, and that is the pen that I love using, especially when it comes to filling out large amounts of space. Like if I'm trying to color something in, I just prefer using the 10 because it's just a lot faster to fill in those spaces. So instead, to fill everything in, I've just been using the size 8. But for the foam part of the coffee cup, I ended up going with my Posca paint pen just to kind of speed up the process a little bit, and then just went in with a black pen to clean up all of the edges. Similar to the awning detail that I did for the first spread, I decided to add a little interior box to the already existing box just to make it look a little bit more visually interesting initially. To be honest, these black lines will probably be covered up by photos anyways, but that won't be for another year. So in the meantime, I just kind of wanted to add a little bit more of detail to them. Once again, finishing off another spread by adding in some coffee staining details, and we are ready to move on to the next one. Another one of my favorite spreads to do every single year is, ironically enough, my favorites of 2025. In this case, my 25 favorites of 2025. This spread essentially ends up being like a very fancy and glorified bullet point list. I knew that for this spread I wanted to bring back the chalkboard idea, so using my X-Acto knife, I essentially created a mini version of like a stand-up chalkboard sign that of course you would probably see outside of any little small business or cafe. And I used the black paper to my advantage, so instead of me having to paste like black paper on top of this chalkboard, I just cut out the middle and used the already existing black pages as the chalkboard itself. Not gonna lie, this spread ended up being much more chaotic than 2024's favorites. Last year the list was very linear, very much so in a row, but it was also on a singular page, and I felt myself kind of being a little bit too restrained when I was filling out all of the favorites, so I decided to turn one page into two and dedicate an entire spread to my favorites from the year. But what ended up happening was, because I go in with the ephemera first, I think I might have covered up too much of like the blank space. So you'll see once I start going in with the number stickers that I end up having to move some of them around to make space for the extra ones because I didn't end up leaving enough room. Overall, the spread definitely looks a little bit more all over the place compared to last year's, but I do much prefer having this be a 2-page spread instead of just a singular one. I feel like I can spread them out a little bit more, and these stickers seem relatively easy to move around, so in case I need to do so, I could easily make more room for a favorite or two. After finishing the ephemera part of this spread, I of course knew where the title for this was going to go, and that was within the chalkboard, so I'm just writing out 25 favorites of 2025, and now begins the fun part of going in and trying to fit 25 numbers within this very chaotic but very cozy spread. With this favorite spread all done, it is time to move on to the final set of pages for this yearly setup, which will be my library, aka book tracker, and productivity tracker. These are two spreads that I've been doing for the past few years in my bullet journals, and this year is no exception, but of course we have to cater them a little bit to the specific theme. So starting off with the library tracker, I wanted to bring back the same chalkboard sign motif that I did in the very first spread. But besides that, I also wanted this spread to essentially mimic the cafe image that you also see on that page, almost as if when you're looking through that window, this is what you see. So we have the same hanging lights, the chalkboard sign, and then using the same craft paper that I've been using throughout this setup, I created these little floating shelves, which all of the books will sit on. I then drew 30 rectangles to mimic the look of books. I know this is more than my goal of 20, but what ended up happening last year was that I read more books than the space that I gave myself on the library, so there's quite a few books that are missing from that spread, so I just decided to give myself a little bit extra room in case I end up reading more than 20 books next year. Speaking of reading, in case you missed my reading journal flip through video from 2024 where I kind of explained where I'm at in terms of my journaling when it comes to reading, I am very much an inconsistent reader. I am a mood reader. So in previous years, my reading journals would be in a very bullet journal style format. And I felt like I was being very wasteful because I wasn't finishing them, and I would read for a few months and then stop, and I don't know, it just wasn't really working for me. So what I decided to do for my reading journal in 2024 was use a insert-based journal, and honestly that has been so much fun to use. I feel way less pressure to consistently read. So with that being said, there won't be a dedicated 2025 reading journal setup because that's just not possible for how I personally track my reading, but I will do a video that's dedicated to how my reading went in 2024 and all of the spreads I did for that, while at the same time setting up some spreads for 2025 within the same journal that I was using last year. Alrighty, moving on to the final page for this yearly setup. We've made it to the end. Thank you so much for sticking with me if you've made it this far. I know this video is a little bit longer than what I normally do, but it is, it includes a lot of different spreads and it takes a lot of time. So I appreciate you being here. But for my productivity tracker, I'm doing the exact same format that I've been doing for the past 2 years of the pixel style tracker. So I draw 365 boxes, numbering them on the side 1 through 31, and lettering them on the top January through December. This is yet another spread that really won't look interesting until the year is over, but it is one of my favorite spreads to just admire at the end of the year. So what I like to do is just essentially track my productivity. I create 3 to 4 different categories. Last year I did 3, this year I'm deciding to do 4, with the 4th category being a self-care day, because even if I'm not necessarily productive that day, I feel like it's still a form of productivity to take a break, which is why I'm adding in the self-care option. Something that I did for last year's tracker, which I won't be doing this time around, 1, because it doesn't fit the vibe of this yearly setup, but also 2, because it was kind of a nightmare to fill in, and that was using my Uniball Signo pen in metallic gold, which looked beautiful with the spreads as a whole, but because it would take forever to dry, I would have to fill it in and then just let my journal sit there for a few minutes. But there were just some days where it's like, I don't want to wait for this to dry. So I would flip to the next page and fill in all my other trackers. But then of course, this ended up leaving a bunch of gold dots on the adjacent page. I mean, it's not terrible. If anything, it worked with the spread as a whole, but I don't really want to have to deal with that for this year. And gold is just not the vibe this time around. So instead, I decided to use more of the Sakura Jelly Roll Moonlight pens in varying shades of gray. I am not sure if they have a more neutral set of like browns and beiges. I didn't have any at the time of filming this, so if there are, I'll probably look into it eventually, but I thought the gray was just a nice contrast and worked the best with this setup. Finishing off this page by adding a few extra coffee ephemera details, and the secondary lattice window is back. I said I used 2 for this setup, and this is the second. I think this page just needed a little bit something extra, and I love how it turned out. Alrighty, cozy friends, it is time for the final flip through of my 2025 bullet journal setup inspired by all things coffee. I really hope you enjoyed. Again, I know this was a bit of a long one, but if you are a fan of journaling content, I think it's fair to say that all of us love watching the yearly setup videos anyway. If you're also like me and enjoy doing some kind of overall theme for your yearly setups, I would love to know what you decided to do for this year. I would also love to know if you went with a black page bullet journal for 2025, because I know there were quite a few of you that decided to try one out because of my videos, and that just means the absolute world to me. I honestly want everyone to experience the magic of these pages. I am very much looking forward to another year of using this Starry Night journal from Scribbles That Matter. Once again, a huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I cannot tell you how much of a dream it is to start off 2025 with this amazing collaboration. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!